Millennia ago, the Sith constructed a shrine on the planet Coruscant. This shrine would be built at the mountain peak of the sacred spire. The spire was considered sacred by the Coruscanti, who believed it to be a light-side virgin's. During a period when the Sith was dominant in the galaxy, they would construct this shrine in an attempt to corrupt the spire with the dark side of the Force. This would prove successful, and the shrine would stand tall until the end of the Great War, a war between Sith and the Galactic Republic where Coruscant would be one of the primary battlegrounds. The Jedi would finally claim victory around 1032 BBY, defeat the Sith, destroy their shrine, and build their own over its foundation. Over time, the Jedi Temple would begin to be constructed on Coruscant in an attempt to crush the legacy that the Sith left behind. As the Grand Temple took shape, the Sith shrine would be buried underneath layers and layers, and the Jedi hoped that the placement of the temple over the shrine, as well as the light side of all who inhabited it, would cancel out any remaining dark side energy from the shrine, neutralizing it forever and returning the virgins to the light side. The Jedi typically kept the shrine covered with a meditation area and only opened it to perform rituals in an attempt to neutralize dark side artifacts they may have come across. Unknown to the Jedi, however, a portion of the former shrine endured the destruction and remained at the foundations of the mountain. Dark side energy began to seep out, making its way into the temple and weakening the Jedi Order, creating a dark cloud over them. Perhaps one of the reasons they were unable to sense the Sith rebuilding, or eventually sense the man who would be known as Darth Sidious right in front of them, not only plotting, but using the Jedi themselves to carry out his grand plan. Years later, the Sith of Darth Bane's new Sith era would find out about the shrine underneath the Jedi Temple, and it would remain a guarded secret among them. Following the rise of Emperor Palpatine, the Jedi Temple would be converted into the Imperial Palace, and he would decide to excavate the shrine, which was a process carried out only by machines which his personal droid oversaw. It seems that Sidious was the only person remaining who had knowledge of the ancient shrine, as apparently not even his apprentice Darth Vader would know about this piece of Sith history, though Sidious would at one point consider sharing this knowledge with his apprentice and use both of their powers to probe the dark side. However, it seems this never happened. Sidious would spend time meditating at the shrine, and it was during one of these meditations that he would sense a disturbance in the Force, which he later discovered was none other than Luke Skywalker. The Jedi Temple would of course eventually be reclaimed by the New Republic after Sidious's death and the defeat of the Empire. However, we unfortunately don't have much information on what became of the shrine after this. Maybe one day though. Dooku was born on the planet Sereno in the year 102 BBY to Count Gora and his wife Countess Anya. At a very young age, Dooku's Force abilities began to develop and show themselves, which frightened his father, who would even consider his own son a freak. The Count would contact the Jedi Order and wish for them to come and take Dooku away from him. Instead of waiting for the Jedi Seekers to arrive, Seekers being Jedi who search the galaxy for Force sensitives, Gora would leave his son outside of the palace along the edges of the forest. Fortunately, before Dooku could freeze to death or be eaten by any outside creatures, the Jedi discovered the boy and took him back to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Dooku would be raised at the temple around the same time period as younglings such as Sidious, who we of course know from being mentioned in the prequels as well as other media and books as well. Dooku strived for excellence and worked hard to surpass the talents of his peers. He would even separate himself from the other younglings, although Dooku would become friends with Sidious, who we've already mentioned. In 86 BBY, Dooku completed the trials and was selected by Yoda to be his apprentice. At one point, Dooku would accompany Yoda as well as other Jedi to Sereno for the Galactic Festival being held there. It's here that Dooku would inadvertently learn of his history when he had a confrontation with his father, who he didn't know about at the time. Yoda would be forced to reveal the truth to the young Jedi at how his father abandoned him all those years prior. Although Dooku was unwelcome by his father, he was able to eventually get to know and remain in contact with his sister Jinza. Upon returning to Coruscant, Dooku threw himself into his training to vent his frustrations at his father, and even wondered what his life would have been like had his father not turned him over to the Jedi. In around 85 BBY, Dooku's faith in the Jedi Order would begin to be shaken. Sidious had a vision of a dangerous solar storm hitting the planet Proto Branch. Dooku supported the idea to warn the planet of this potential event. However, they were forbidden by the Jedi Council, who stated that visions were not absolute and that the future was constantly in motion. However, Yoda would eventually accompany the young Jedi to the planet, and unfortunately, Sidious' vision came to pass as the deadly storm hit the planet, with the Jedi themselves barely surviving the event. Dooku was angry at the Republic and Jedi Council's unwillingness to act, and felt they were at least partly responsible for what happened, and was also angry at how the Republic seemed to care more about the loss of Proto-Branch's resources than the deaths of the planet's own people. Dooku would continue his Jedi training, and sometime between 82 and 78 BBY, he would complete it and become a Jedi Knight and eventually Master. He would go on to become one of the most skilled Jedi of his generation and a fantastic lightsaber duelist. Dooku took on his first Padawan, Rael Averross, and would train him for 10 years and eventually began training his second Padawan, none other than a 12-year-old Qui-Gon Jinn in 68 BBY. Qui-Gon and Dooku would have many missions together, and Dooku would teach his Padawan well, and Qui-Gon would of course become a great Jedi himself. Over time, Dooku would grow to become more and more frustrated with the Republic due to its corruption and the Jedi Council at how political they had become and felt they were too connected to the government. In 42 BBY, Dooku was introduced to the Senator of Naboo, Sheev Palpatine, who, of course, unknowingly to Dooku at the time, was the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. Shortly afterwards, Dooku went home to his home world of Sereno after learning of his family and heritage years earlier. His sister Jinza reached out to Dooku for help, and he found himself caught in the middle of an invasion of Sereno led by Dooku's own brother Ramil, who wished to turn the people against the Republic. However, in the battle, Dooku would kill his own brother. This would lead Dooku to reclaim the title of Count, and would also come to possess his family's fortune. Feeling that the people of his home world needed him, especially after what his brother had done, Dooku decided to leave the Jedi Order to lead Sereno as Count Dooku. Dooku informed his master Yoda of his decision, and while Yoda was saddened, informed Dooku that his decision was respected among the council. Yoda would even allow Dooku to keep his lightsaber after Dooku attempted to turn it over to his master. He would also be welcomed back for visits at the Jedi Temple due to his past as a Jedi and the respect he had among them, and would even meet with the council on some occasions. Darth Maul was introduced to us all the way back in 1999 in Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace. This mysterious, intriguing, and honestly just really cool character would unfortunately meet his demise at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi after killing Kenobi's master Qui-Gon Jinn, just as we were getting used to him. He would of course make his return in the Clone Wars animated series, and over the years has become a fan favorite among Star Wars fans. But when exactly did the Sith Lord known as Darth Sidious meet his Zabrak assassin? How long had Maul been with Sidious, lurking, carrying out missions for the evil Sith? Well, in our history in today's video, it begins with one of the most acclaimed novels in Star Wars Legends, that of course being the novel Darth Plagueis by James Luceno, a great writer who also wrote multiple works in the Star Wars galaxy. During Palpatine's apprenticeship under Plagueis, he had a craving to visit Sith worlds, dark side worlds. He would find himself on the planet Dathomir, and while there, he began to feel something. The novel says this: he was meandering without clear purpose through one of Blue Desert City's dustier quarters, far from the city center, when he became aware of a faint pulse of force energy, the origin of which was indistinct but close at hand. Reaching out with the force, Palpatine would soon find himself in the market area where he would spot a woman wearing a crimson robe with its hood raised, carrying a small bag on her shoulder. She exuded dark side energy, accompanied by a sense of urgency and deceit. After a few moments of watching her, Palpatine would make himself discernible in the Force, and it didn't take long for the woman to notice him. "Good sir," she called to Palpatine in Basic as she drew near. Palpatine pretended to be taken by surprise. The woman would single Palpatine out as having the appearance of an intellectual and influential man, something Palpatine of course agreed with. The two exchanged a few words, and Palpatine would give a laugh when the woman offered him a gift. She would open the bag she was carrying and reveal a small humanoid child, less than a year old, a male Zabrak with short horns and ceremonial tattoos. "My own child, this one is," the woman said. "I seek only to save his life." And the two would have a conversation pretty decent in length, where Palpatine would identify the woman as a Night Sister, therefore the young infant as a Night Brother. But for this video, I won't go over every little minute detail, but instead really only cover some of the important points. Upon Palpatine's inquiry, the woman essentially says that she is trying to spare this infant and allow him to live a free life since his sibling cannot. She also identifies Mother Talzin as the threat she is trying to safely deliver the child from. It took some convincing from the woman, but Palpatine would eventually agree to take the child, as he could feel that the Force was strong in him, and that essentially would be a good enough reason to keep him from wandering about, or worse, fall into the hands of the Jedi. Maul would spend the first few years of his life in the care of droids at a secret location on Mustafar. Sidious would tell his master about Maul, and Plagueis would give Sidious permission to train the Zabrak as an apprentice. Now, if you're a bit confused by this, seeing how this is still the Rule of Two era, and Palpatine and Plagueis were the two Sith at that time, Maul was really meant to be trained as a Sith assassin only, someone who could do the bidding of Plagueis and Sidious and not be considered a true Sith apprentice, merely a tool who could be expendable. To say that Maul had a pretty terrible, torturous upbringing under Sidious's training would be an understatement, and we won't cover all of the details here, but instead fast forward to Maul's final test. He would be abandoned on the world of Hypori and be forced to survive hordes of assassin droids. After much time had passed, Sidious would return and challenge Maul to a lightsaber duel, which Maul would lose due to being so weakened as well as injured. Sidious would taunt Maul, saying that he had been training a new apprentice to take Maul's place instead, that Maul had failed. The furious Zabrak lunged toward his master and sunk his teeth into Sidious's hand. However, Maul was so spent that he prepared for death. Sidious would then reveal the truth. There was no other apprentice, and by Maul wanting to kill his master, he had indeed passed the final test, and he was now Darth Maul. As Sheev Palpatine rose to power on the political side, his master Darth Plagueis continued his research into immortality. Both Sith would become aware of a young slave boy from the planet Tatooine named Anakin Skywalker. Thanks to information he found out from Dooku, Palpatine learned that, according to the boy's mother, he had no father, and at first, Palpatine wondered if he could be a clone. However, this idea was shot down by Dooku, who informed Palpatine that Qui-Gon thought Anakin to be a result of the Force, and the possible chosen one spoken of by an ancient prophecy, destined to bring balance to the Force. Palpatine relayed the information to Plagueis as the two began wondering if it was possible that the Force struck back at them nearly a decade earlier by creating this boy, as they themselves saturated the galaxy with the dark side of the Force in their attempts to manipulate midichlorians. Plagueis knew that he had to see this boy. To make this a simple and well-explained video, I'm going to read pieces straight from the Legends novel Darth Plagueis by James Luceno, which states, "Ignoring the reactions of apprehensive residents and wary security personnel, Plagueis hastened along a plush corridor in 500 Republica toward Palpatine's suite of crimson rooms. He had planned to be at the Senate building to hear Amidala's call for a vote of no confidence in Valorum, which would strike the first death knell for the Republic. At the last moment, however, Palpatine had contacted him to recount a conversation he had with Dooku. The fact that Qui-Gon Jinn had identified Maul as a Sith was to be expected, but Dooku's news about a human boy at the center of a vergence of the Force had come as a shock. More, Qui-Gon saw the boy as the Jedi's prophesied chosen one. He had to see this Anakin Skywalker for himself, had to sense him for himself. He had to know if the Force had struck back again 9 years earlier by conceiving a human being to restore balance to the galaxy. Plagueis came to a halt at the entry to Palpatine's apartment. Eventually, one of Queen Amidala's near-identical handmaidens came to the door, a vision in a dark, cowled robe, her eyes fixed on the breath mask. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "Senator Palpatine is not here." "I know," Plagueis said. "I'm here to speak with a guest of the senator, a young human boy." Her eyes remained glued on the mask. "I'm not permitted." The mask motioned swiftly with its left hand, compelling her to answer him. "You have my permission to speak." "I have your permission," she said in a distracted voice. "Now where is the boy?" "Anakin, you mean?" "Anakin, yes," he said in a rush. "He's the one. Fetch him, now." "You just missed him, sir," the handmaiden said. Plagueis peered past her into Palpatine's suite. "Missed him?" He straightened in anger. "Where is he?" "Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn came to collect him, sir. I suspect that you can find him at the Jedi Temple." Plagueis fell back a step, his thoughts reeling. There was still a chance that the Council would decide that Anakin was too old to be trained as a Jedi. That way, assuming he was returned to Tatooine. But if not, if Qui-Gon managed to sway the Council Masters. Plagueis ran a hand over his forehead. "Are we undone?" he thought. "Have you undone us?" Skipping ahead in the book a little, Plagueis, refusing to give up, continues his search for answers regarding this possible chosen one, and the book continues. It was late in the evening when Plagueis made his way onto a public observatory that provided a vantage on the proprietary arabesque of a landing platform on which Queen Amidala's royal starship basked in the ambient light. With the cowl of his hood raised, he moved to one of the stationary macro-binocular posts and pressed his eyes to the cushioned eye grips. Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the boy had arrived at the platform in a Jedi ship. Amidala, her handmaidens and guards, and a loose-limbed Gungan in an open-topped hemispherical air taxi. Just then, the latter group was ascending the starship's boarding ramp, but Qui-Gon and the round-faced desert urchin had stopped short of the ship to speak about something. "What?" Plagueis asked himself. What topic has summoned such an earnest look to Qui-Gon's face and such confused urgency in the boy? Lifting his face from the macro-binoculars, he stretched out with the force and fell victim to an assault of perplexing images, ferocious battles in deep space, the clashing of lightsabers, partitions of radiant light, a black-helmeted cyborg rising from a table. By the time his gaze had returned to the platform, Qui-Gon and the boy had disappeared. Trying desperately to make some sense of the images granted him by the Force, he stood motionless, watching the starship lift from the platform and climb into the night. He fought to repress the truth. The boy would change the course of history. Unless Maul had to kill Qui-Gon to keep the boy from being trained. Qui-Gon was the key to everything. Sheev Palpatine and Higo Damask to most, Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious to each other, retired to the penthouse suite of Plagueis, who dismissed his guards, and the two began drinking fine wine in celebration of Palpatine's Senate victory. "A toast," Palpatine said, "to the culmination of decades of brilliant planning and execution." The two drained their glasses only to have them immediately refilled. "And to the new meaning we will tomorrow impart to the rule of two." "Only you could have brought this to fruition, Darth Plagueis," Palpatine continued. "I will endeavor to live up to your expectations and fulfill my responsibility." Plagueis took the compliment. Upon his master's inquiry, Palpatine confirmed that he had prepared some remarks for a celebration the next day. He began giving Plagueis a summary of his words, to which Plagueis smiled. "I'm pleased. Go on." Palpatine did, and Plagueis would have some tips here and there for his apprentice as the night wore on. Many glasses of wine later, Plagueis would become intoxicated and exhausted. Plagueis had barely slept in nearly 2 decades after an attempt on his life left him severely injured when a vibroblade removed a part of his face and forced him to wear a transpirator, which was now trying to repeatedly adjust itself almost in a panic after the unfamiliar sight of a fatigued Plagueis. After this attempt on his life, Plagueis would become quite paranoid, even refusing sleep and attempting to discover the secrets of immortality. His breathing slowed and his eyelids flickered and finally closed. Palpatine came to a stop after practicing his speech and gazed at his master. He let out a deep breath, set down his own wine glass, and took his cloak. As he started for the door, something stopped him. A sinister look contorted his face as he heard the dark side whisper, "Your election assured. The Sun Guards absent. Plagueis unsuspecting and asleep." Sidious moved in a blur. The excruciating blue lightning shot from his fingertips and attacked the breathing apparatus on Plagueis' face. The moon's eyes snapped open as he attempted to gather the force inside of him. For a moment, Plagueis merely gazed at his apprentice after realizing that he was being challenged. Sidious, taken aback by his master's reaction, stood still before calling upon the dark side once again, drawing more deeply on it than ever before. Then the lightning came again. Sidious, reveling in this experience, would begin a monologue to his suffocating master. "You useless old fool." It was Higo Damask as Plagueis who set his sights on a seemingly confused young man with meticulous skill, manipulated him into committing patricide, matricide, fratricide. Darth Plagueis, who took him as an apprentice, sharing some of his knowledge but withholding his most powerful secrets. Plagueis, who turned away from the grand plan to focus entirely on himself, in an egotistical quest for immortality. Sidious paused as he stared at his old master. Plagueis the Wise, who in his time truly was, except at the end, trusting that the rule of two had superseded, and failed to realize that he would not be excused from it. Plagueis, struggling for breath, managed to stand, only to collapse back onto the couch. You lost the game on the very first day you chose to train me to rule by your side, or better still, under your thumb. Teacher, yes, and for that I will eternally be grateful, but Master, never." Plagueis' eyes began to bulge as Sidious went on. "You may be wondering, when did he begin to change? The truth is that I haven't changed. As we have clouded the minds of the Jedi, I have clouded yours. Never once did I have any intention of sharing power with you. I needed to learn from you. You've been nothing more than a pawn in a game played by a genuine master, but now that we've won the race, I have no need for a co-chancellor. I have Maul to do what the risk of discovery might not allow me to do, while I execute the rest of the grand plan. Growing an army, fomenting rebellion and fabricating intergalactic war, corralling the Jedi and catching them unawares. Rest easy in your grave, Plagueis. The Sith will have their revenge." Plagueis rolled to the floor, lying face down. His lungs gave out, and he was gone. Sidious moved to the window and pulled the drapes aside. He knew those who knew he Damask would merely assume he died due to a malfunction of his breathing apparatus. Sidious stared out. The first rays of daylight were rising over the tallest buildings. The interior lighting was turned off, and he, Vader, was free of the armor that he had to wear to sustain himself in public. The Force was powerful. Vader thought the dark side even more so, but he had never been able to use it to heal his badly burned body to the extent that he wished. That he was alive at all was something of a miracle, but he had somehow failed to master the energies needed for complete regeneration. He believed that it was possible, that with sufficient meditation and training, he would someday be able to rebuild himself into the man he had once been. Physically, at least. He would never go back to what he had been mentally. Weak, foolish, idealistic. Anakin had been much like Luke Skywalker was now, mere potential. Yes, the Force was strong in Luke, perhaps even stronger than it had been in Anakin, but the boy needed to embrace the dark side, to learn where the real power was, to achieve his true promise. If he did not, the Emperor would destroy Luke. Vader did not want that. When they fought, he had also tried to strike the boy down, but that had been merely a test. Had he been able to kill Luke easily, Luke would not have been worth the effort to recruit. But although he had certainly attempted to defeat Luke, the boy had held his own. Despite Vader's superior skill, despite his experience, Luke had survived with no more damage than an easily repaired amputated hand. The meeting had made Vader feel, not a normal occurrence lately. There had been the thrill at meeting a worthy opponent and pride that the one so strongly opposing him was his own son. Vader smiled into the darkness surrounding him. Obi-Wan had not told Luke that Anakin Skywalker had become Darth Vader. Luke's anger at the man who had slain his teacher had been potent, had allowed the dark side to claim him. If Vader hadn't broken that anger with fear and confusion by telling the boy that he was his father, Luke could have defeated him. A Jedi does not fight in anger. He holds his emotions in check and allows the Force to move through him. But the dark side needed to be fed with strong emotion, and when it was, it repaid that sustenance tenfold. Luke had felt the power of the dark side. It was up to Vader to find him and allow him to feel it again. The dark side was addictive, more potent than any drug. When Luke accepted it, he would be more powerful than Vader, more powerful than the Emperor. Together, they could rule the galaxy. Enough. It was time for another test. Vader waved his hand over the motion-sensitive controls in his chamber. The spherical chamber opened and the lid lifted with a hydraulic hiss, an escape of pressurized air. He sat exposed to the surrounding room, unprotected by the super-medicated and oxygenated field inside the chamber. He concentrated on the injustice of his condition, on his hatred of Obi-Wan, who had made him so. With anger and hatred, the dark side of the Force permeated Vader. For a moment, his ruined tissues altered, his scarred lungs and dead alveoli and constricted passages smoothed out and became whole. For a moment, he could breathe as normal beings breathed. His sense of relief, his triumph, his joy at being able to do so, drove the dark side from him as surely as a light chases away shadow. The dark side eagerly consumed anger, but it was poisoned by happiness. It left him, and when it did, he could breathe no longer. Vader waved his hand, and the half-dome lowered and sealed him into the chamber once again. He had achieved it briefly, as he had done several times before. The trick was to maintain it. He must not allow himself to feel relief, but must somehow cling to his rage even as he healed. It was difficult. He had not purged all of Anakin Skywalker, that blemished and frail man from whom he had been born. Until he did, he could never give himself over totally to the dark side. It was his greatest weakness, his most terrible flaw, a single spot of light amid the dark that he had been unable to eradicate over all the years, no matter how hard he tried. Vader sighed. He would have to try harder. He could not afford any weaknesses, given his enemies, and more especially, given his friends.